Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and welcome to the series on understanding and addressing vaccine hesitancy in the Muslim community from an Islamic perspective. In this episode, we will be looking at some of the claims that have been made against vaccines, or some of those arguments that have been presented by those who either are against or are hesitant when it comes to taking vaccinations. We'll be looking at those claims that say vaccinations are not my business. I'm not sick. Nobody in my family has a problem, so why should vaccination be my problem? Those who would say vaccines are being used to spread infertility and barrenness. They are drugs that are actually meant to sterilize a community to control its population. Some would say it's impure, that there's some form of najas, a religious impurity, something that is haram in the vaccine that a Muslim should not take or ingest or allow to be put in them. Some would say vaccinations could worsen the health condition of people with underlying conditions, those with diabetes or those who have already got a challenge on the health side of things, that vaccines will just make things worse. These are the things we will inshallah be looking at. I'm your host, Muhammad Nuruddin Lemu, and with me to discuss these topics are two of our distinguished facilitators, Brother Ibrahim Bello. He is a specialist, a person with a master's in biochemistry, but also works with the IBB Specialist Hospital. You are most welcome to this program. And also Sister Basira. Sister Basira Raji has a master's in pharmacognosy and has a broad background in the biological sciences. I'd like to start with asking Sister Basira, on the subject of vaccine hesitancy, how would you respond to those who say, it's not my problem, I am not sick, so why should I get vaccinated?
When an individual says it's not their problem, it doesn't concern me. It simply means that particular person lacks emotions or feelings of what other people are going through. And when that happens, that particular heart of apathy is one of the major reasons why the country or the community is getting destroyed, and is also one of the major weapons for mass destruction. And then when you have a lot of people in the community that says it's not their business, it doesn't affect to me anyway. They see people dying, suffering, going through a lot of troubles, and they believe it's not something that has to do with me. It doesn't concern me. I'm not the one going through this problem. Even when they see other people that are vulnerable, like the elderly ones, the children going through this process of dying and spreading a lot of viruses or a lot of diseases, they still don't care. So it actually means they lack empathy, and they lack apathy, and they lack emotions. They don't know what other people are going through. So I'd want them to listen to the hadith of the Prophet that say, Allah does not show mercy to those who do not show mercy to others. And verily Allah show mercy to those who show mercy to others. And also to emphasize the hadith of the Prophet, talking about getting concerns for others. It talks about when you love for yourself what you love for others. And that is how you can be a true Muslim. And on this note, even when you believe that it's not your own concern, you're a Muslim. So as being a Muslim, it is an obligatory act on you to do what you will love for yourself to others. And so as Muslims, you are like a pillar to one another, more like a building, like a cement, brick by brick, supporting one another, engaging one another, joining what is good and forbidding what is wrong, strengthening one another, strengthening the board, supporting one another. So it is a paramount responsibility for any one of us to know that it is incumbent on you to do what? To care for others, whether it is your concern or not, whether it affects you or not, or whether it is going to be a way to spread the disease or stop the disease or not. So it is a responsibility for a better and safer community.
So if my brother's in trouble, so am I.
Yes.
If, as you gave the metaphor used by the Prophet, peace be upon him, to describe the Muslim community as being like a bunyan, a building, where each part reinforces the other. And so even though it doesn't affect me, if it affects another part of the building, I think another metaphor used by the Prophet ﷺ is to say the community is like a jasad, like a body. If one part is hurt, the other part responds. And so even though I don't have a problem, but if my being vaccinated reduces the spread of the vaccine, then the need to look into this and avoid apathy and consider this issue of compassion. Al Ibrahim, what would you add to this?
Yeah, because Islam teaches proactivity. The Prophet ﷺ will say, "Man ara'a minkum munkaran falyughayyirhu biyadihi." Whoever sees abomination or anything going wrong should try to change it with his hand. Like if you see any abnormality, make efforts.
Even if it doesn't affect you?
Yes.
Yeah, so long as it's wrong.
Make efforts. Either physically when you have authority, or speak against it, or at least the weakest of it is to just do with mind. And also caring for others, not only human beings, fellow creatures of God, is one of the attributes of God-conscious Muslims. Similarly, anything that concerns life is even of utmost importance. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in one hadith will say, "لَتَأْمُرُنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَلَتَنْهَوُنَّ عَنِ الْمُنْكَرِ أَوْ لَيُوشِكَنَّ اللَّهُ أَنْ يَبْعَثَ عَلَيْكُمْ عِقَابًا مِنْهُ فَتَدْعُونَهُ فَلَا يُسْتَجِيبَ لَكُمْ." That the earlier you encourage good and you forbid evil, you are proactive about positive changes, really. Else Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will send a punishment on you. And at that point you get to supplicate and Allah will not listen to you again.
Yes,
because you've taken a lot of things for granted. Similarly, whatever concerns life, like I said earlier, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will say, "Man qatala nafsan bi ghayri nafsin faka'annama qatala an-nasa jami'a. Wa man ahyaha faka'annama ahya an-nasa jami'a." Part of the meaning of the verse is, whosoever saves a life is as if he saved the whole of entire mankind. So if saving life is this important, then whatever is a requirement or a little act from you to save life is also necessary. Action of Muslims is supposed to bring peace and security and safety to others. So a Muslim should not play part, however little, that will jeopardize the life of others. So if taking vaccination will help save life of others, not your own, then so be it. And that's why Islamic authority could even mandate it if the leadership sees any good in that. So for a Muslim that has an opportunity to act and refuse to act is actually a sign of weak faith. In fact, Izzuddin bin Abdul Salam says it is not acceptable of a Muslim who has opportunity to act, of changing any good and he refuses, or to stop an evil and refuses. He said he is not part of a Muslim. No. So as Muslims, we should be very proactive. We should take whatever effort necessary. There is nothing to be spared. So when it comes to issue of vaccination or whatever affect others, because most of these people giving these excuses are actually selfish in a way. Because there is no way you see people dying, you see epidemic, and you say it doesn't concern you. Other people's life are as important as yours. And by the way, how do you know whether it has not affected you? So it is just not acceptable, and there is no good excuse. These are not the kind of things where somebody should absolve himself and say, "I am less concerned." This is an issue of life and death. Yeah.
Sister Basira, what would you add to this issue? You mentioned a lot about this need to be caring to an extent where it's an obligation to care, and if you see something wrong, you should change it with your hand. What would you add?
Receiving vaccination is also a category or an effort to stopping harm. Just like one of the maxims of Islamic jurisprudence that talks about Adalu Rizal, harm must be eliminated. So it is an effort that is exacted on you to, taking the vaccination, it will stop the spread from whatever it is that is going to get into the body or spread into the community. So you are taking an effort to do whatever is needed for you through the vaccination. And so it's just like I'm trying to look for a metaphor of you going on a picnic on a sea. And when you are going, you have no provision for preventive measures. So you are just going without having a life jacket. Anything can happen. Unforeseen circumstances can happen. So when you prevent this from the onset, it's possible when anything happens, you have a life jacket on and it saves you from whatever can happen. So it's more like a prevention before it actually happens. So vaccination is just like a prevention to stop the spread of it through taking vaccines. And for those who think it doesn't affect them, It is not their business. I'm not concerned because it doesn't affect me. Allah is saying in Surah Al-Anfal, warning us that and fear the fitna, the affliction, which affects not only one person in particular, but all in total. I remember when we were in school, when we have issues that has to do with noise making, and the teacher comes and he warns you, I don't want to hear any noise from this class again, irrespective of who is making noise or not. When next time the teacher is coming back and see that you're still making noise, everybody is asked to stand up, raise your hand and close your eyes. So when it happens and you feel it doesn't concern you, it's not just only you that will go through the punishment of raising your hand and closing your eyes. So we still need to ensure that that harm has been blocked, the means to that harm that is blocked at very, very crucial part before it goes and spread. And the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, reported by Udayfa ibn Iman, saying that, in respect to what Madam Bello has said, that you will continue doing this act of forbidding good and enjoying forbidding evil and enjoying righteous goodness. And when it's gone to a point that you feel like you don't want to do all these things that Allah has entrusted on you, Allah will send down punishments. And when Allah sends down punishments, you will supplicate to Allah and Allah will not accept it. So it is a means for us to ensure that this particular act is what it is stopped at a very early stage and vaccination is encouraged. And on a handy note, you are seeing harm, you are seeing evil. Because it doesn't affect you doesn't mean that you can't play your part. You can do your part as little as it is, because a drop of water makes an ocean.
Jazakallahu khairan. And this maxim, ma la yatim al-wajib illa bihi fahuwa wajib, that whatever is a prerequisite for an obligation is treated in Sharia as an obligation. And once it is established that this prevents death of innocent people, it's an obligation for Muslims to save life. It's one of the fundamental maqasid and objectives of Sharia, the hifd nafs, the preservation of life. And once it is clear that this actually saves lives, then it becomes something that should not be taken lightly. And so while some scholars would put it as encouraged, others would actually consider it compulsory. And some governments will consider mandatory vaccination as what is in the best interest of maslahah, or the general population. I'd like to ask you, Madam Ibrahim, on the next claim made by some, that the ingredients of vaccines or some vaccines is not completely halal, that there's some impurity, some najas, something that is haram for a Muslim to consume or take. And for that reason, they would not take vaccines or not accept vaccines for themselves or their children. How would you respond to that?
Well, it is true that that is part of the claim recycling over time, even since in days of polio crisis and what have you. But to start with, everybody can make whatever claim. But as people that are reasoning, we have thinking tools that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us. Number one, who says what? These signs of isnad. Let us be people that have filters. If somebody makes a claim, number one, who is he? If a Muslim scholar makes a claim on vaccine, according to whose expert? Because he's not. Then secondly, expert, yeah. Thank you. Hatu burhanakum in kuntum sadiqin. Then secondly, who is making the claim? What is his evidence? And a number of all those tools that are very important for a Muslim to always have them in order. If not, anybody will just come with anything. And that's why scholars will say, لَوْلَا الْإِسْنَادِ لَقَالَ مَنْ شَاءَ مَا شَاءَ. Had it not been for the sake of this science of scrutiny, anybody will say what he likes and get away with it, like we're having in Nigeria today. But to start with, currently we are dealing with HPV vaccine, COVID vaccine, and a number of other vaccines. The current HPV vaccine licensed by WHO for use, you have 6 types. You have 2 bivalent, 2 quadrivalent, and 1 non-avalent. These ones have been licensed to be used worldwide. Now, most of them contain proteins of the HPV types 6, 11, 16, and 18. Amorphous aluminum hydroxyphosphate, sulfate, yeast protein, L-histidine, polysorbate 80, sodium bicarbonate, sodium borate, and water. Most of these ingredients can be synthesized from yeast and other microorganisms. Actually, they can be cloned outside even the cell. with the modern technology and genetic engineering. So you don't even need a pork or some of these things like people would claim before. In those days, the only way you can get insulin was that of pork. But today you can even synthesize it outside the system. Similarly, when you are talking of COVID vaccine, usually it is the, like I said, attenuated, the weakened version of the virus that is extracted. And with things like PCR and other technologies, most of these things can be multiplied. They could be cloned in multiples outside even a living system. So you have messenger RNA, mRNA, you have lipid molecule, carrier, saline, sugar, potassium, and a number of all these things that are just, some are preservative, some are just carriers. Okay, some are adjuncts or adjuvants, you call them, that are meant to aid the action of these things. So all of these things are not haram. And that's why for anybody claiming they are haram, let us ask him who is he and according to who. Because anybody can just come and bamboozle us with information because he's not comfortable with it.
On any medicine?
On any medicine.
And all.
And just to ask, the medicines were taken even before vaccine, did we even stop to ask where do they come from? What is used in coating most of these capsules and gelatins and gel drugs? Do you know what is being used? Because people claim, okay, what of the gelatin? It is gotten from pork. But it's not true. There are many other sources of gelatin. Ligaments and bones from chickens, from cow, and a number of these things. You can actually get gelatin from them. Again, there is this concept of, even when it is the only possible way of getting it, these things are not extracted directly and used in making these vaccines. They've undergone a number of processing and reprocessing and purifying. There is a concept of istihala in Sharia, which when you change things from their natural form, they become permissible.
What do you mean? Example?
Yeah, istihala, for example, when you take something from a cow, or let's say pork, you extract fat, you boil it, you sterilize, you sort of purify it, and then you change it to something else. Like in Islam, also there is this concept of if alcohol is fermented, if it over ferments, it becomes something else which is now permissible.
Vinegar.
Vinegar. So it's halal. For the fact that it is not serving the previous role again, it becomes permissible. So same thing happened in the concept of most of these things that are used. So people should be very cautious of saying these things are haram. Because this issue of saying haram, halal, you're actually assuming the position of Allah and His Prophet. Let's just be very cautious. These things are not haram as far as medical community is concerned. Wallahu alam.
So firstly is what you've already mentioned, that when we look at the ingredients of these vaccines, they do not contain any haram. So, that's that. Even if a particular medication, we're not even talking about vaccines, but even if a particular medication did contain something that had some origin in something that was haram, just as you've mentioned, even if gelatin came from pork, it has so transformed by this process of istihala. And as you've explained, istihala is this physical and chemical transformation of something so that it is no more the same thing as the original, and the ruling of the original no more applies to this transformed substance. So the example that you gave is that of, say, if you look at the stages, you can get grape juice or fruit juice, which is halal. But when you allow it to ferment and it's able to intoxicate, it is now a different substance, and the ruling is that it is haram to consume.
Yeah.
But the same alcohol or wine, you allow it, you mix it with vinegar culture, leave it for another couple of weeks and months, the same thing has now transformed to become vinegar, which is halal. Yeah. But because its attributes have changed from that of alcohol, the ruling also changes. And I think this is an important thing that many people are not aware of when they start looking at labels of products and start giving the ruling of the original onto something that has completely completely transformed from the original thing, and they give the original ruling on something that actually the Quran and Sunnah has not prohibited. Thank you very much for that insight. Sister Basira, what else would you add on this issue of ingredients? Some say it contains haram ingredients. He says it doesn't. But what else would you add to this discussion?
I'd like to start on this note that from the Surah Hujurat, verse 12, where Allah says, "O you who believe, most especially directing to the Muslims, avoid suspicion, for every suspicion, most cases, is a sin." And directing to Muslims, as we know, when suspecting someone or abhorring speculations or suspicions that are not true, is actually a sin. So, also on the authority of Abu Hurairah, reported the Prophet ﷺ says that avoid every act of suspicion, because most of this act of suspicion comes with a worst of tales, and do not look for fault on others, and do not spy. All these speculations, suspicions, thoughts that you don't even know if the evidence is or the proof is true. So it doesn't really say that this is what it is. You just believe or you assume that this is what it contains. So even though it contains some aspect of this particular impure substance or haram substance, even though it doesn't contain it, because there are some of the vaccines that is being administered in very many health centers in Nigeria now, more like the BCG vaccine, the HPV vaccine, and other vaccines that are administered to young children from young age till adulthood, doesn't contain anything that has to do with haram content. It doesn't have anything that has to do with haram, and is safe for consumption for Muslims. And even though they contain things that has to do with haram contents, like maybe alcohol or pork, then it might actually be in a state of a very dear need, maybe in a state of darura or in a state of necessity, or just in a state at which you need to save a community. And maybe there's someone's life that you need to save, or you want to prevent someone's limbs from getting cut off. So in that point in time, until when you get something else as a substitute, of course. So at that point in time, you have to understand that it is only being used at that point in time for that particular reason and in a state of necessity. And I'd like to back that up at the level of scholars of Islamic jurisprudence that use the verses of Surah Al-Baqarah as one sentence that says that he has only forbidden you dead animals, blood of swine, and that which has been dedicated to any other than Allah. Even when you know this has been dedicated to any other than Allah, but whosoever is forced just out of necessity, or you don't have any other reasons to go for it, just because at that point in time there is no other thing that you can use, then Allah is most forgiving. It doesn't weigh that sin on your neck, it doesn't weigh that sin on you. It's forgiving and most merciful. So I'd like to just chip in that.
So if what you're saying is, take worst case scenario and somebody says it does contain haram, the fact that it is life-saving or can save the lives of others in the community makes it a situation of necessity which would have allowed even the haram anyway, whether it was alcohol or pork or whatever. So then of course there's the point you make where even if it did come from something that is haram, it has been transformed through istihala and the original ruling doesn't apply. Or, as you've already said regarding these vaccines, but they don't even contain haram in the first place, according to the experts. And so if the experts have said it doesn't contain haram, and you've brought the verses that make it clear what is prohibited, and those are very well known, but we have to ask, who's challenging that? If the Islamic Medical Associations of Malaysia, the FEMA, Federation of Islamic Medical Associations, those of South Africa, those of the British Islamic Medical Association, BIMA, those from different parts of the world who have studied this subject area, have looked into the ingredients, when they all come and say it is pure, we honestly have to ask ourselves, who are we listening to that makes us doubt our greatest authorities? Who is the alternative voice that has that reputation or has our interests? I'd like to thank you both for your contributions to this subject. I look forward to further discussions about other claims about vaccines. We'll stop there. Jazakumullahu khairan. Thank you very much. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم